Near midnight in Akron, Ohio, rain hammered the cracked windows of the Griddle Diner as if trying to break its way inside. The streets outside were empty, washed in the sickly orange glow of failing street lamps, the kind of night when trouble moved more freely than people. Inside, Reese Miller worked alone, her rounded shoulders tight beneath a faded uniform, her fingers stiff from years of chemical cleaners. She wiped the counter in small, determined circles, trying not to think about the eviction notice folded inside her apron. From the back booth, Ed Kowalski snapped. "Reese, you close the door at 12, you clock out at 12. I'm not paying for dead time." His words landed like a slap, loud, public, and meant to remind her of her place. Reese steadied her breath, but the room shifted when the diner door swung open and two soaked children stepped inside, shivering hard enough to rattle their teeth. The older boy, alert and tense, pulled his sister behind him and said, "Sir, please, we won't cause trouble. We just need somewhere warm." Ed shot to his feet. "Absolutely not. Get out before I call the cops." The boy's jaw tightened. Reese felt the air thicken, the kind of moment that could tilt a life in one direction or another. What happens next? If this opening moves you, tap like and subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales for more stories that stay with you. Rain slid down the diner's windows in uneven streaks, carrying the city's grime with it, and Reese Miller felt the weight of the night pressing harder than usual. She watched the two children standing just inside the doorway, thin, shaking, drenched to the bone, and something in their eyes struck her with a force she hadn't felt in years. The boy's shoulders were squared as if he was ready to be thrown back into the storm. The girl clung to his sleeve, her small hand trembling. They didn't look like customers. They looked like survivors of a world that had stopped caring. Ed's heavy footsteps thudded against the floor as he approached, each step a reminder of the hierarchy he enforced like gospel. "Get out," he growled, his breath thick with the scent of old cigarettes. "This ain't a shelter." The boy lifted his chin. "Sir, please. Just a few minutes to warm up." "No," Ed snapped, and the lights above them flickered as if recoiling from his voice. Reese moved before she could stop herself, placing her body between the kids and Ed. "They're freezing," she said quietly. "Let them sit." The boy's eyes flicked to her, startled. His sister's lips parted with a tiny gasp of relief. Ed leaned closer until Reese could see the deep lines etched from years of anger. "You don't decide what happens in my diner." Her pulse thudded, but she held his stare. "I decide whether I serve them." Ed jabbed a finger at her chest. "And I decide whether you work here tomorrow." The boy stiffened. Reese didn't let herself back down. "Then you'll have to fire me," she said, though she knew the truth. Losing this job would unravel the last fragile thread keeping her from the street. Ed's eyes flashed, sensing that vulnerability, and for a moment Reese braced for the worst. But he stepped back, muttering under his breath and waving his hand dismissively. "Do what you want," he barked. "Don't expect me to fix your mess." The children slid into a booth tucked deep into the shadows. Reese brought them towels, 2 steaming mugs of cocoa, and a warm plate of food. As the boy guided the mug toward his sister's hands, his voice softened in a way that cracked something inside her. "Slow sips, Mia. Don't burn your tongue." Reese felt her throat tighten. It had been years since someone spoke with that kind of tenderness in this place. She returned to the counter, pretending to wipe down the surface so she could watch them without seeming intrusive. Every few minutes, the boy glanced at Ed's office door, the tension in his shoulders refusing to ease. He looked like someone who'd been chased more than helped. When they finished eating, the boy approached her carefully, as if expecting a trap. He placed a small folded paper on the counter. "We can't pay," he murmured, "but we won't forget." Reese opened her mouth to reassure him, but he didn't wait. He took his sister's hand, guiding her out into the rain with the cautious urgency of someone who had learned the world didn't give second chances. Their silhouettes dissolved into the darkness, leaving the diner colder than before. The next morning Ed fired her. He didn't look at her when he did it. He simply tossed a thin envelope onto the counter. "You stole company resources," he said. I run a business, not a charity. Reese wanted to argue, but her voice wouldn't come. Years of exhaustion collapsed inside her chest like wet cardboard. She walked out of the diner into the biting air, each breath burning with the realization that she had nothing left but a few loose bills and an eviction notice waiting at home. Days blurred into weeks. She lost her apartment, then her car, then the little sense of safety she had managed to hold onto. She slept in shelters, then on acquaintances' couches, then in a garage-turned room that smelled permanently of mold and regret. Through every move, through every cold night, the only thing she kept with her was the small paper the boy had left behind. She unfolded it sometimes just to remember that, at least once, she had mattered to someone. Years passed. The hardships didn't slow. They gathered, one on top of the other, pushing her deeper into corners of the world where voices went unheard. But she held on. Not because she believed things would get better, but because she didn't know how to stop trying. By the time she was in her 60s, her knees ached so loudly she could barely stand after a long shift, and her hands shook when she buttoned her coat against the winter wind. She lived alone in a small weather-beaten house with a sagging porch, patching its cracks with tape and hope. Nights were long and quiet, and the absence of companionship settled into her bones like cold. Then came the notice to vacate. 3 days to leave a place barely standing. On the final afternoon, as rain crept along the rooftops and the sky dimmed into a dull silver bruise, Reese packed her 2 boxes and sat on the leaning porch. She whispered to herself that she had survived worse, though the hollow ache in her chest insisted she had nothing left to give. With her belongings beside her, she waited for the landlord to arrive, believing this was the quiet end of a life spent giving more than she had ever received. But instead of the landlord's battered truck, a sound rose from the end of the street, a low, resonant hum so out of place it froze the neighborhood into stillness. The black Rolls-Royce glided forward like a living shadow, its headlights cutting through the misty rain. Reese stood slowly, unsure whether to run or brace herself. The rear door opened, and a tall man stepped out, dressed in a charcoal suit with shoulders built from discipline and ambition. For a heartbeat, Reese saw only a stranger. Then she met his eyes. Bright, sharp, unmistakably familiar. "Reese," he said softly. "It's been a long time." Her breath trembled. "Leo." He nodded, reaching into his coat and revealing the small folded paper she had kept for years, now preserved in plastic, edges worn but legible. "You kept us alive," he said. "And I came back for you." The weight of 15 years collapsed between them, not with the cruelty of time lost but with the relief of something found again. Leo helped her into the car, the warmth of the interior wrapping around her like the embrace she didn't know she needed. As the car pulled away, the world she had endured for decades seemed to shrink in the rearview mirror, but the storm wasn't finished with her just yet. The landlord, Mr. Fallon, arrived moments later, furious to see her belongings untouched on the porch. His boots slammed against the pavement as he stomped toward the Rolls-Royce, shouting about deadlines, owed rent, and how people like her always try to wriggle out of responsibility. Leo stepped out of the car before the man could take another angry stride. His voice remained calm, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "Mr. Fallon," he said, "I'm here to inform you that your control over this property has ended." Fallon scoffed. "Who do you think you are?" Leo handed him a packet of documents. "The new owner." Fallon flipped through the pages, his face draining as he reached the notarized signatures. Every threat he'd been prepared to unleash at Reese evaporated. This can't be legal." "It's very legal," Leo replied. "And so are the fines you'll face for every violation on this property. Unsafe wiring, mold exposure, predatory rent practices." Fallon's voice cracked. "I didn't." "You did," Leo said simply. "And the city will deal with you." 2 officers stepped out of a squad car idling at the curb. Fallon's rage twisted into fear as they approached him, asking him to step aside and answer questions. Leo didn't watch as the landlord's protests turned into pleading. He simply opened the car door for Reese again, as if escorting her out of a life that had been far too cruel for far too long. Inside the Rolls-Royce, Reese watched Fallon being led toward the car in handcuffs, his shouts muffled by the closed windows. She didn't smile, but a quiet sense of justice slid through her, steady and warm. Leo met her gaze. "You deserved better than what this world gave you," he said. "It's time you finally receive it." Reese looked out at the rain-soaked street where she had nearly lost everything, then back at the man who had returned like the answer to a question she stopped asking years ago. The storm outside dimmed as the car began to move again, but a new storm, one of long-awaited retribution, was only just beginning for the man who had preyed on her vulnerability. And the moment the blue and red lights flashed in his rearview mirror, he realized exactly who had rewritten the rules of his little kingdom. What happens when justice finally comes for a man who built his power on cruelty? When the plane touched down in Baltimore and Reese stepped into the warm glow of the Vance family home, she felt something unfamiliar settle quietly inside her. Possibility. Not the wild, impossible kind she used to whisper to herself on long nights, but a steady truth that came from finally being seen. Leo and Mia didn't treat her like a guest or a charity case. They welcomed her as if she had always belonged there. And for the first time in decades, she allowed herself to believe that belonging was real. As the days passed, the weight she had carried for half her life began to loosen. She learned to walk without pain, to wake up without fear, and to look forward without flinching. She realized that the world had not been waiting to crush her. It had been waiting for her to outlast the storms long enough to reach this place of safety. What changed wasn't the past, but the meaning she chose to give it. Every sacrifice, every lonely night, every moment of doubt had led her here, to a chapter she never expected but deeply deserved. One evening, she stood by the kitchen window and watched Leo's headlights curve up the driveway, the same way they had on the day he returned. Only this time, the sight didn't feel like a rescue. Felt like a homecoming. If this story moved you, please like, share, and help Canada's Heartfelt Tales grow by subscribing. Your support keeps these stories alive.